Hi everyone. Today we will look at the one more feature of the Anvil app. So we look at this the Anvil is the framework using which you can build a web apps using with the pure Python. So in the previous video we look at what is Anvil, and then we integrated Anvil with the ChatGPT, or let's say OpenAI API, and build product description generator. So that's what we did. So in today's video, what we're going to do, we're going to see how can we create our Anvil app, this particular web app, which is purely written in Python to connect with the database. So Anvil does has inbuilt database, but today I'm going to show how do we connect to our own external database, which is like let's say MySQL or something like that, and then how do we show those database rows in a tabular format, and that's what we're going to see today, right? So to start with, what we will do, this is what if you click on start building, you should end up here, and that's what we will do. So let's create one app, a blank app here. Okay, let's create the blank app, and we're going to use, let's say, this material design 3, you know UI theme or whatever you can call it. Okay, not sure why it is taking time. Let me refresh the page and try again. Seems my internet is slower. Okay, let's try again and use this material theme. Here you could see the name of the app. We can give app maybe I would say external DB demo. Okay, that's what we will call it, external demo. And then here, right, here is actually the database that you can create the internal DB, but we want to create connect with an external DB what we have, right? As we know that this is going to be the UI, this is going to be server code and all this thing, right? So before we start, let's first of all see what database we're going to actually the database records we're going to show here. So here is the sample Python code I have. We have used this in a many actually tutorials, right? So I have one sample DB which actually I created from this a MySQL sample database I got. So I use this whenever I want to show sometime, right? And then this database has a table called customers, right? And we can see that customers has customer name, their number, and maybe the country and all of these things, right? So we can, let's say, we want to connect to this database which is I created in the AWS RDS, which is relational database service, right? To make it more realistic rather than using, let's say, localhost or something like that. So this is what we have. So I'm using PyMySQL. It's like say one of the library that we can connect to the MySQL, and this is our host where actually AWS host is there. This is our username and password of our database, and this is the database name is called Classic Models, which is the same name what I have used actually. So this is what the sample DB this particular website provides. And I have a typical, let's say, connect function which is going to give me the connection object. That's what it is going to give me, a connection object, right? You see, this is where I'm going to call it, which is going to take the same information what we have specified here, MySQL connect, right? So see what we are doing. Let's say for a demo purpose, we know that there is a table called customers, and we want to retrieve the customer number, their name, and their country from this particular table. So if I run this thing, this particular function, and if I print the two records, so you could see I get a list. Okay, I get a list of records here, and each record, if you see what I have a customer number, customer name, and the country, which is like a dictionary. So I get the list of dictionary. Now why I'm getting in the format this key and value, because of this thing I put the MySQL cursor, dictionary cursor. If I don't put, I think I will not get that thing. Let me try this thing. Let's remove this thing and see what we get actually out of this. So let's run this thing again. See, you see, we are getting only those values, the list of tuples, and we are not sure what is this and what is this column, right? So that is the reason we have this thing, a dictionary cursor, so that we get column name as a key, and then the associated value, with it, right? So this is one row in the database, this is another row, right? Okay, enough. So this is what information we have, right? Now let's say what we need if you want to display such a information, a tabular form information in the, so in the Anvil, we have something called the data grids where you can display this information. And this data grid internally contains something called repeating panel. As the name suggests, repeating panel, it is actually repeating something, right? So if you know that, what is this thing, so here you're going to have one row, right? So maybe you can call it some text field here, right? And then they are simply repeating for each row, right? That's why you need some kind of a thing called repeating panel, right? And then what exactly it is repeating, it is repeating this row panel, this one thing it is repeating, right? So we will see exactly what those things when we actually build. So okay, let's start actually building this particular thing. Let me go to where is our external DB app, it is here, right? And this is our client side code, nothing but our UI. So you can click on your form, right? And then you can see here toolbox, the right side. If you click on toolbox, let's what we want a data grid. So if you hover here, you could see this thing is called data grid. So let's drag it here. You get the same thing, right? Let me get this, we don't need this thing. Okay, something like similar, you got this data grid here, right? So it has three columns by default. So if you click on it, okay, if you click on it and then click on a properties, you can see it is called data grid 1. That is the name it has, and then you can start, you can see you can edit certain things, right? So we know that we can put three columns, you can increase the column, you can see you can add a column. You see we got the fourth column, right? But let's say we only have three columns, right? Maybe so we can remove this column. So let's remove this fourth column, and you can rename this column, right? So we know what we're going to display, we're going to display customer number. So let's use this thing as a column name, right? And maybe we can make it something better. Let's make it as a customer number. Okay, what is the next column? The next column we have customer name. Let's take this thing, column 2, which is customer name. Maybe let me delete this thing, right? And then finally I have a country. Maybe I can call it customer country. Now you could see it got reflected a customer number, customer name, and the country. I give those column names, right? And there are many other properties that we will see, So once we have this data grid, as we know that data grid actually contains something called repeating panel. So if this is data grid, but if you click inside here, you see this section, which is actually a repeating panel, and you can actually see it is only highlighted these three rows. If you click here, it actually highlighted everything data grid, but if I click here in the middle, these are the three rows highlighted. And you can see if I click on properties, it's actually a repeating panel. That is where the things are repeating, right? And then it also has its own properties and all these things, right? But where is exactly our content is going to stay, which is again a something called a data row panel, right? Where actually there is a placeholder where you can put some values or slots, you can call it, right? So if I click here somewhere in the middle, double click, then you see only one of those row got highlighted, and that is nothing but actually where we're going to put our values. So how we going to put the values? So when you click double click here, if I click outside here, it will go. Again, if I click double click in the middle, and then if I click on toolbox, actually I can drag and drop certain things here. So I will take the label because the text field what we want to display, and it is not editable, right? If it is editable, I would have taken this one. But since it is not editable, I just want to display it, I will take the label field and I will drag here. Now I got the label 1. Similarly, I can drag label 2, and let's take the label 3 also, because all of them are actually whatever the label field, right? Now I can just like this is row panel, now I can click on individual label that I put. So if I click here, you can see only this label is highlighted. If I click on properties, I could see it is actually the label 1, right? You can put some information here, but we know that we don't want to put some text here. Actually this needs to take values dynamically, right? That's what we want to see, it needs to take values dynamically. Then how things works actually, so since this is a repeating panel, we need to pass something to it, right? We need to pass some kind of a list of objects, nothing but this thing, right? We know that this one thing is one row, other thing is other row. So we need to make sure we pass this list of things to the repeating panel so that it can repeat over this thing, this. But then we need to tell that which column should have which values. So there is something called binding. We want to tell that, hey, whenever I'm going to pass this list of dictionaries to you, this customer number key should go to this column, the customer name should go to the other column, and that is nothing but is the binding, right? So that we can do. So when I click on the label 1, I can go here and I say let me bind the data, that hey, if I'm going to pass some items here, I can decide which key needs to match to the label 1. And we know that our one item is going to be this, right? So let's copy this customer number is the key that we can put here. So we can put it here. So now it is going to map to the customer number. Similarly, I can click on this, again go to the properties, and then that's going to match with the customer name. Don't worry, we're going to send those value. Currently, we are just putting the mapping here, right? So go to the data binding, and now this got mapped to the customer name. And similarly, this should, the label 3, should match to our, let's say, country. Go to the data binding, we are changing the text property of that label, and okay, now all we have binding and all everything is set up. Now what is remaining, we need to pass the whole list of those dictionaries to this repeating panel, right? And that's what we will do now. So first of all, we need to fetch this thing from the database, right? So we have to go to server code. So let's create one something called add server module where we can put this server code, a typical Python code, right? So we can take our code, this code, right, which we can, since it is a plain Python code, we can copy paste it here. So we imported our PyMySQL, our database details, and the connect function. We don't need this thing, this one we are not calling, right? And then we need a function which actually, you know, can return the get the customers and simply return this customer. We don't need this thing. So this function is what it is doing. It is returning thing. What it is returning, it is returning those list of dictionary, and where we, each dictionaries are one row from the database, right? That's what it does. We have seen in the last tutorial, right, that if you want this function to be get called from the UI, because UI also has a code which is here, we want to make sure this is callable, and for that we have to use this decorator called anvil server.callable. If you put this, it means this function can be called from the this UI component, right? Now we have a function which can repeat our list of customer details, right? But we need to call this function. So let's go to this again form, which is our UI form, what we just saw, right? We can go its code properties, and whenever this form is initializing, we can assign this data. But where do we want to assign this data? We want to assign to the repeating panel. So you go here in the code section and again do the self dot. If you do the dot, you will find all of the things associated with this form. So self dot means, since form is a class, self dot means all the properties, all the elements of that particular form. So we search for repeating, let's put R. So this is repeating panel 1 because that is the name of our panel. If you go and check, you know properties, this is the repeating panel 1, right? You can actually rename it if you want. So if I go here and I can simply say, maybe instead of repeating panel, I might say the customer list panel, something like that. Okay, and then I can save it. Now it is customer list panel. If I go again to the code and I search now, I don't see now repeating because it's there is nothing. But then I can search for a customer list panel. I got it, right. And if I now, that is the element. Now if I click add a dot, I will get its property. So I get the items is one of its property where we want to assign the items, right? If you remember this items key, if you go to the, again this thing, and if you go to any particular label that we saw, we actually, this item is nothing but those, when we're going to pass these items, one of them is going to be that single item, right? And that is value we are passing here. So let's go back here, not here, let's go to this particular thing, and dot items is equal to something what we got from the, so we need to call this thing. Server module has our function. So if you click on server, you know I think, yeah, server dot, or maybe anvil dot server. Let's see, I forgot the syntax. Yeah, I think anvil dot server, maybe dot call, and now we can call the function. You see, it suggested get a customer because that's the function we have here. So get customer. So now it is going to call the get customer function from the server module here, right? And whatever it is going to return, which is nothing but the list of dictionary, and simply going to assign to this customer lit panels. I think we have everything now, because once we assign this thing here, we have already created the mapping that once it get assigned, which column should get which value. We already done it. Now maybe we can, simply run this application. So run in a new tab, and you could see all of these things coming from the database. This is the customer name, okay, customer number, customer name, and all of these things, right? So this is what your data grid, which contain the repeating panel. So you can change certain properties. If you go back, let's go to our form, right? And Okay, this form one, what happened? This is server module one. Okay, yeah, here is it. So this is where the UI, and again, let's click on this data grid and let's look at its properties. Data grid, we can put a column, there is expand field, maybe it will expand those values or something like that. What we can do, yeah, we can change the rows per page. This 20 is too much, let's put only 5 rows per page and see whether it reflects. Then restart, and now we should see only 5 records per page. Now you see there are only 5 records per page, right? So this is how you can play around. Maybe you can change certain things, right? And all of these things, I think if you go to this text field, let's double click, this is one row. If you go to the label one, see whether we could change something. It's another properties. So this is appearance property, maybe we can change certain thing about it. Maybe you can change the background color if you want. And there are a lot of different colors it has. What if we change something? Maybe we see this one, primary container, whatever this color, and let's restart and it should get reflected. Yeah, you got this color, right? We don't need actually, but yeah, this is how you can play around, right? So this is how you can display a data from the database in the Anvil, right? So this particular thing, as we discussed, it's called the data grid, where we are displaying things. And since the nature of our information is it is nothing but repeating those rows in those slots, we use something called repeating panel. And that repeating panel is actually repeating one row panel. That is what we saw. So when we put UI elements, we're actually putting inside that row panel, right? So you can experiment with it, right? When you double click it, this is our row panel where you can actually put values, right? So I hope you found this video useful. We will be covering many such tutorials on Anvil, because recently we started exploring it and we have been using it for few of our customers, and it's been really good tool actually. There are a lot of limitation with the Streamlit, and that is the reason whenever you want to build something, some kind of a customized tool where you can have some customized UI, the Anvil is really good tool. Another thing is that you can easily add user authentication and user management and all of other stuffs, right? Let's say login with the Google and all of those stuffs, right? That is the reason I got really interested in the Anvil, and I will be making like many videos on Anvil, right? Okay, thank you very much.